A widowed Marquis hired a cook to feed his son, but what she did changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main characters. The wind howled outside the grand stone manor, and within, silence hung heavy in the air. William Archer, the widowed Marquis of Ravensbrook, stood alone in the drawing room, staring out the window, his thoughts as cold and bleak as the winter storm raging beyond the glass. His eyes, once filled with warmth and life, now reflected only the deep ache of loss. His wife, Elizabeth, had been gone for 3 long years, and though time had passed, the emptiness in his heart never wavered. The weight of her absence pressed down on him every day. Their son, Samuel, was a reminder of everything he had lost, his bright smile, his laughter now replaced by silence. The boy's once lively energy had dimmed, his heart heavy with grief, and William, though filled with love, could not seem to reach him. Desperation drove him to hire a new cook, a position he hoped would offer some stability and normalcy for Samuel. Little did he know, this decision would alter the course of their lives forever. Evelyn Carter, a woman of humble origins, arrived on a stormy night, carrying nothing but a small, worn suitcase. Her hands trembled as she stepped into the warmth of the manor, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. She had little to her name, but a heart full of determination and a quiet hope that this new job would be the fresh start she needed. She had been raised in a world far different from the opulence of Ravensbrook, but she knew how to work hard, how to care for others, and, most importantly, how to cook with love. Her first encounter with Samuel was filled with tension. The boy looked at her with a coldness that mirrored his father's, his eyes distant, as if trying to shut the world out. But Evelyn, unlike the others, did not shy away. She saw the pain behind his eyes, the quiet sadness that lay beneath his stoic exterior, and she knew, from the very first moment, that this would not be an ordinary job. Her simple act of preparing a warm meal for him was the first of many small steps that would slowly begin to thaw the icy walls around Samuel's heart. As the days passed, Evelyn found herself drawn into the complexities of the Archer family. William, though distant and cold at times, was not without his moments of vulnerability. She caught glimpses of the man he once was, the husband and father who had been consumed by grief. Yet, it was in his interactions with his son that she saw the depth of his love, his silent struggle to connect, to heal the wounds that time had not yet mended. And in those moments, Evelyn felt something stir inside her, a compassion she could not ignore. As the winter storm raged outside, the warmth inside the manor began to grow, but it was not the fire in the hearth that changed everything. It was the quiet, tender moments shared between Evelyn and Samuel, the small acts of kindness that Evelyn offered, and the way those moments began to melt the barriers William had built around his heart. But despite the slow and steady healing taking place within the walls of Ravensbrook, nothing would ever be the same again. Evelyn had not only fed their stomachs, she had begun to feed their souls. Little by little, her presence, her kindness, and her unwavering spirit had started to heal the wounds that had festered in the Archer family for so long. What started as a simple arrangement between a widowed Marquis and a humble cook would soon blossom into something far deeper, something neither of them had anticipated. The days that followed brought a strange sense of peace to Ravensbrook Manor, a peace that had long eluded its inhabitants. Evelyn settled into her role with ease, her presence filling the once quiet halls with warmth. She moved through the household with purpose, ensuring that each meal was prepared with care, every room was tended to with attention to detail. The servants, who had once regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, began to admire her calm determination. But it was Samuel who felt the most noticeable shift. He began to eat more, to speak more, though still in quiet whispers at times, as if his voice was breaking free from the cage of grief that had bound it for so long. William watched from a distance, his emotions torn between gratitude and something he couldn't quite place. He had hired Evelyn to feed his son, to offer him the care and nourishment he so desperately needed. But as the days passed, he found himself looking at her differently. There was an ease in her presence, a gentleness that softened the hardness he had allowed to take root in his heart. One evening, as the glow of the hearth flickered across the room, William found himself in the library, alone, his thoughts wandering. Samuel had gone to bed, and Evelyn had just finished preparing a light supper for herself. He had been meaning to speak to her, to thank her, but each time he opened his mouth, the words seemed to vanish. Instead, he watched her from the doorway, her back turned to him as she tidied up the small kitchen. She hummed softly to herself, the simple tune filling the space between them. Her movements were graceful, unhurried, as if she had always belonged here, as if the grand walls of Ravensbrook had been waiting for her to bring them to life again. His heart clenched, but it wasn't pain that he felt. It was something else, something unfamiliar, something he had long since buried. Evelyn sensed his presence before he spoke. She didn't turn, but her voice, calm and steady, broke the silence. "Is there something you need, Your Grace?" William stepped into the room, his boots soft against the stone floor. "I wanted to thank you, Evelyn," he said, his voice gruff, though not unkind. "For everything." She turned then, her expression thoughtful but warm. "It's my pleasure, Your Grace. Samuel is a bright boy. He's only been waiting for someone to care for him properly." William looked at her, his gaze softening. "I don't know how to help him," he admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I've tried, but it feels like I've lost him." Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes full of empathy. "Sometimes, all it takes is someone to simply be there, to show him that he's not alone." She paused for a moment, her gaze lowering. "We all carry burdens, Your Grace. Some are visible, others are not. But they can be shared, if you're willing." William felt a stir in his chest at her words. He had not expected this kind of understanding from her. This quiet wisdom that seemed to come from a place of experience, not just kindness. It was in that moment that he realized how much she had already given them, how much she had already begun to change. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope, a hope he had nearly forgotten. The next few days passed in a gentle rhythm, each moment quiet but significant. Samuel's smile began to return, even if it was only a fleeting expression, a glimmer of the boy he had been before the weight of loss had dulled his joy. William found himself spending more time with his son, taking him on long walks through the estate, showing him the gardens that had once been filled with laughter. Samuel began to speak more freely, asking questions, laughing at his father's rare jokes. And in those moments, Evelyn watched from afar, her heart swelling with pride for both of them. She had never imagined that her simple actions would have such an impact, but it seemed that her presence was slowly mending more than just the cracks in their lives. It was healing her own as well. William, though still quiet, began to seek her out more often, not just in the kitchen, but in the garden, in the study, in the moments where the house felt less like a mansion and more like a home. She had brought something back to Ravensbrook that had been missing for so long, a sense of warmth, of belonging, of family. But even as the house grew brighter with the promise of new beginnings, Evelyn knew that the road ahead would not be without its challenges. The bond that was forming between her and the Archers was still fragile, still in its infancy, but she couldn't help but feel that this was the start of something important, something that would change them all forever. Inevitably, the calm that had begun to settle over Ravensbrook Manor was soon shattered by a single, unspoken tension that neither Evelyn nor William could ignore. As the days grew longer and the harshness of winter began to soften, the connection between them grew deeper, yet the unspoken bond between them also began to evolve into something more complicated. William, though still a man of few words, found himself drawn to Evelyn in ways he hadn't expected. He would often catch himself watching her as she worked, her graceful movements in the kitchen, her laughter that seemed to echo through the halls, the way she made the mundane act of preparing a meal seem like an art. It was these small things that stirred emotions within him, emotions he had buried so long ago. Despite this growing attraction, William remained distant, unsure of how to act on the feelings stirring inside him. He had been alone for so long, consumed by his own grief, and the thought of moving forward was a daunting one. But with every passing day, Evelyn seemed to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. She spoke to him with kindness and empathy, offering him a steady presence he had longed for, even if he didn't yet understand why. One afternoon, as he sat in the study, reading the latest report from his estate, he was startled by the sound of Samuel's laughter coming from the garden. The sound was pure, unguarded, a reflection of the joy that had been absent for far too long. William stood, his gaze wandering toward the large windows that overlooked the expansive gardens. There, he saw Evelyn kneeling beside Samuel, the two of them laughing as they worked together to plant flowers. The sight of them, so effortlessly intertwined in their connection, tugged at William's heart. Evelyn had become the bridge between him and his son, a bridge he had never realized he needed. As he watched, a realization began to settle in his chest. He had begun to rely on her, not just for her skills in the kitchen or her care for Samuel, but for the way she had slowly become the lifeblood of the household. She had given them something they had both lacked, hope. He left the study and made his way to the garden, his footsteps soft on the gravel path. As he approached, Evelyn looked up, her expression warm but cautious. She had sensed the change in him, the way his gaze lingered on her a little longer each day. But she said nothing, simply smiling as he drew near. "I didn't realize how much Samuel had missed the garden," Evelyn said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of a gentle truth. William nodded, his eyes moving to the small boy who now clutched a flower in his hands. "He's always had a love for it, but I've never truly been able to share that with him. Not in the way he needs." His voice faltered, the admission heavy with unspoken regret. Evelyn stood, brushing the dirt from her hands. "Sometimes, all it takes is a little patience," she said softly. "Children, like gardens, need time to grow." William looked at her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. She had always been there for Samuel, but now, it seemed, she was becoming something more to him as well. Something he wasn't sure he was ready for, but knew he couldn't turn away from. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could find the right words, Samuel ran over, his face lit up with excitement. "Look, father, I planted it," he said, holding out the small flower with pride. William crouched down to his son's level, a smile tugging at his lips. "You did a great job, Samuel." His gaze shifted to Evelyn, and in that moment, he saw her not just as a cook, a caretaker, or a presence in their home. He saw her as the woman who had helped heal them both. And, for the first time in a long while, he felt something stir in his chest, something he had long denied but could no longer ignore. It was a flicker of hope, of possibility. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of gratitude and something deeper. She looked at him, her smile gentle but knowing. "It's my pleasure, Your Grace." But William knew, in that moment, that it was more than just that. He had begun to see her in a new light, and the path ahead, though uncertain, was now filled with a new kind of warmth, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Inevitably, the quiet, slow-growing connection between Evelyn and William became a shared space neither could ignore, even if neither was ready to admit the weight of what it meant. The days passed, with each one carrying more warmth than the last, as Samuel's laughter echoed through the halls more freely, as though it had found its way back home. It wasn't just the changing of seasons, it was the slow but undeniable shift that had taken place inside their hearts. Evelyn's presence in the manor had begun to alter the fabric of life in a way neither she nor William had planned. She was more than a mere caretaker. She had become the steady hand guiding them both out of the shadows of grief. Yet, despite the changes, William remained cautious, guarding the space between them. He could not shake the doubt that lingered in his mind, the quiet voice that reminded him that she was still the help, a woman beneath his station, someone he should not feel so drawn to. But every time he caught her smile, or heard her soft laughter as she worked, that voice became quieter. He couldn't deny the feelings stirring within him. One evening, as the evening air carried a chill into the manor, William found himself alone in the study, the familiar weight of loneliness pressing down on him. He had meant to spend the evening reviewing his estate's affairs, but his mind kept wandering back to Evelyn. It wasn't just her kindness to Samuel, or her ability to breathe life back into the estate. It was something more, a warmth in her presence that began to fill the empty spaces in his life. He was startled from his thoughts by a soft knock on the door. "Your Grace." Evelyn's voice called gently from the hallway. "May I come in?" William hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. "Yes, Evelyn." Please, come in. She stepped into the room, her presence calm and measured, as always. I thought you might want some tea, Your Grace, she said, her eyes warm with unspoken understanding. It's getting colder outside. He nodded, though he hadn't realized how much the cold had settled in his bones. She moved to the table and set the tea down, her movements graceful, with a quiet confidence that made him pause. He watched her, not saying anything for a long moment. The silence hung between them, comfortable yet thick with something else, something unspoken. Evelyn, he finally said, his voice low. I owe you more than just thanks. She looked at him, her gaze steady. You've already done enough, Your Grace, she replied softly. It's my job. But William could see the way she hesitated, as though the words didn't fully match the truth she felt. It's more than that, he said, stepping closer, his heart pounding unexpectedly. You've done something that no one else has been able to do. You've brought my son back to life. Evelyn's breath caught, and for a moment, she didn't speak. She simply looked at him, as if waiting for him to continue. But he didn't. The moment stretched, thick with the words neither of them had said. He felt something shift inside him then, something that he couldn't ignore any longer. I don't know what to do with this feeling, William admitted quietly, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before meeting hers again. I've spent so long holding everything in, building walls, trying to protect what was left. But you've changed that. Evelyn stood still, her heart racing in her chest. She had always known that her place in the household was temporary. She was just the cook, the woman who had come to help, and nothing more. But the way William was looking at her, the vulnerability in his eyes, it made her heart ache. I never intended to change anything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I only wanted to help. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. You've done more than that. There was a shift in the air then, a quiet tension that neither of them could deny. It wasn't a moment of dramatic change. It wasn't the kind of thing that could be labeled or understood in one breath. But it was something, a quiet recognition, the beginning of something they both knew would grow in time. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out as if to bridge the distance that had always separated them. And in that moment, Evelyn realized that she had already crossed that distance, without meaning to, without even knowing it. She was already part of this family, part of the life she had never expected to have. And so, without saying another word, she reached up to take his hand, the unspoken promise between them settling in the silence of the room. Inevitably, the days passed by in a quiet blur. Ravensbrook Manor had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Samuel's laughter filled the halls more often now, and William found himself spending more time with his son, walking through the gardens, and engaging in simple conversations. That hadn't happened in years. But as the winter days began to fade into spring, there was an unmistakable shift in the air, a tension that neither he nor Evelyn could deny. Their connection had deepened in ways that neither of them had expected. The once unspoken feelings that had lingered between them were now impossible to ignore. William, though still a man of few words, found himself seeking her out more and more. There were moments when he caught her in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, her hands busy with the tasks of the day, and he would pause to watch her, a silent appreciation filling him. He had hired her to care for his son, but somewhere along the way, she had become the heart of the household in a way he never anticipated. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, William found himself sitting alone in the library. He had intended to read, to lose himself in the reports from his estate, but his mind kept drifting back to Evelyn. The way her presence seemed to light up the room, the way her laugh had become a balm for his weary soul. He had fought these feelings for so long, but now, in the quiet solitude of the library, he could no longer ignore them. It was in that moment that he realized the truth. He cared for her deeply, more than he had ever allowed himself to admit. As if on cue, there was a soft knock at the door. Your Grace. Evelyn's voice called gently from the hallway. May I come in? William stood from his chair, his heart racing as he walked toward the door. Yes, Evelyn. Please, come in. She entered, a soft smile on her lips, and a tray with tea in her hands. I thought you might like something to warm you, she said, setting the tray down on the table beside him. William's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. Thank you, he said, his voice low, his words tinged with something deeper than mere gratitude. She noticed the change in him, the way his eyes held something she hadn't seen before. There was a quiet vulnerability there, a look that spoke of something more. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. William hesitated, the weight of his emotions pressing down on him. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything. About you. About what's been changing here." Evelyn met his gaze, her heart beating faster in her chest. She had known, of course, that something had shifted between them, but she had never expected him to voice it. "William," she began, her voice uncertain. I don't know what to say." He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers for something. Understanding, perhaps, or maybe reassurance. "You've already done so much," he said quietly. "You've given Samuel so much. You've given me something I didn't even realize I needed." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest, but at the same time, a flutter of uncertainty. She had never imagined that her time at Ravensbrook would lead to this quiet understanding, to this connection with the man she had come to admire and respect. "I never expected this," she said softly. "I never expected to feel this way. About you. About us." William looked down, his fingers brushing the edge of the table. "I didn't either," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't ignore it anymore. The way I feel, it's undeniable." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she was silent, unsure of what to say. But then she took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "I care for you, William," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of the words. "More than I ever thought I could." He reached out then, his hand gently touching hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. Everything they felt was conveyed in that quiet, shared moment. And in that silence, they both knew that this, whatever it was, would change everything. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles they hadn't yet faced. But for the first time in a long while, both of them felt something they hadn't in years: hope. Hope for something more, something deeper. And with that, they both understood that they had found something precious, something worth holding on to, no matter the cost. Inevitably, the quiet bond that had been forming between Evelyn and William grew stronger as the days turned into weeks. They were no longer just the cook and the master of the house. They had become something more, something they both knew they couldn't easily define. William found himself seeking her out more often, not just to thank her for her care of Samuel, but because there was something about her presence that filled the spaces of his life he hadn't known were empty. It wasn't just the warmth she brought to the manor, nor was it only her care for his son. It was her quiet strength, the way she moved through the world with a grace that was impossible to ignore. Evelyn, too, found herself thinking of William more often, not just as the grieving widower or the father struggling with his son's grief, but as a man she was slowly coming to care for. She had never expected this connection, but the way he looked at her, the way his words were laced with gratitude, it stirred something inside her, a feeling she had not anticipated, yet could not ignore. One evening, after a quiet dinner, they found themselves alone in the drawing room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Samuel had already gone to bed, his laughter still echoing in the corners of the house, and the quiet of the manor felt both comforting and intimate. Evelyn sat by the fire, her hands folded in her lap, when William entered the room. He hesitated for a moment at the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes spoke of something deeper, something he had been holding back. "Evelyn," he said, his voice soft but filled with an emotion she hadn't heard before. "I need to say something to you." She looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice gentle. He stepped closer, the space between them suddenly feeling smaller, though neither of them moved to close it. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his eyes not leaving hers. "About everything. About you." Her breath caught in her throat, her hands tightening in her lap as she waited for him to continue. "You've changed things here," he continued, his voice low and steady. "More than I ever expected. You've brought back something I thought I'd lost." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Evelyn felt her heart swell, but at the same time, fear began to creep in. What was he saying? What did this mean for them? She stood slowly, the tension in the room thickening with every passing second. William, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never meant to cause any confusion. I'm just here to help. William took a step closer, his gaze intense and unwavering. You've done more than help, Evelyn, he said quietly. You've given us both something we've been missing. You've brought back life to this house, to Samuel, and even to me. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel something for you. Something I can't ignore. Evelyn's heart raced in her chest. She hadn't expected him to say this, to feel this way. She had tried to keep a distance, to remind herself of her place, but now, in this quiet room, with the firelight dancing around them, she realized she could no longer deny it. She cared for him, too. William, she began, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. I never wanted to complicate things. But she faltered, unsure of how to continue. I care for you, more than I thought possible. He reached out then, his hand gently touching hers, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver through her. I know, he said softly, his voice filled with an emotion that took her breath away. I feel the same way. And I think, for the first time in a long time, I'm ready to embrace it. They stood there for a moment, the distance between them shrinking with each passing second. Neither of them spoke, but the weight of the moment, the shared understanding, was enough. It wasn't just a confession, it was a promise, unspoken but understood. Evelyn felt her heart beat faster as William gently took her other hand, his gaze never leaving hers. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that this, whatever it was, could be real. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet of the manor and the warmth of the fire, they both knew that everything had changed. What started as a simple arrangement had blossomed into something deeper, something worth holding on to, no matter the obstacles they would inevitably face. Inevitably, the days that followed were filled with a quiet kind of bliss. The awkwardness that once hung between William and Evelyn was now replaced with an unspoken understanding, an undeniable connection that neither could escape nor wanted to. Ravensbrook Manor, once a place filled with loneliness and the weight of grief, now hummed with life, with warmth. It was a transformation not just in the household but in their hearts. William found himself seeking Evelyn's company more often. There was a softness in her presence that he hadn't known he needed, a calm that seemed to settle his restless mind. He found himself looking forward to moments when they could sit together, sharing the quiet of the evening or the simple joys of the day. Samuel, too, had changed. His laughter, once so rare and fragile, had returned in full force. He was playing more, his heart lighter, his spirit no longer burdened by the heavy shadow of loss. And Evelyn, she was the bridge between them, the one who had helped them find their way back to each other, even if they hadn't yet fully understood it. One evening, as the last light of the day faded from the sky, William found himself in the library, a familiar place, but tonight, it felt different. There was a calm in the air, a stillness that wasn't suffocating but comforting. He had been reading the estate's financial reports, his mind drifting in and out of focus when the soft sound of footsteps broke the silence. He looked up to see Evelyn standing in the doorway, a hesitant smile on her lips. I thought you might like some tea, she said, her voice quiet, but with a warmth that made his heart stir. Thank you, William said, his voice low, his gaze lingering on her a little longer than usual. There was something about her, something about the way she had changed everything without ever intending to. She stepped into the room, placing the tea on the table beside him, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before she looked down at her hands. I was thinking, William began, unsure of how to phrase what had been on his mind for days now. About everything. About what's changed. Evelyn looked up, her expression unreadable but soft. What has changed? She asked, her voice filled with a quiet curiosity. William's heart raced, and for a moment, he found himself at a loss for words. Everything, he finally said. I didn't realize how much I had shut myself off from the world. From Samuel. From you. Evelyn's breath caught, and for a moment, they both stood in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. She had always known that something had shifted between them, but hearing him say it, hearing him admit it out loud, made something inside her stir. I never meant to disrupt anything, she said softly, her voice filled with the slightest trace of uncertainty. I only wanted to help. William took a step closer, his gaze intense but gentle. You've done more than help, Evelyn. he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. You've saved us. Both of us. You've brought life back into this house. Evelyn felt her heart swell at his words, a warmth flooding through her chest. But there was something else there, something deeper. I didn't save you, she whispered, her gaze falling to the floor. You saved yourselves. You just needed someone to help you find your way back. William reached out then, his hand gently lifting her chin so that their eyes met once more. Perhaps, he said softly, but I wouldn't have found my way without you. The world outside the windows had long since faded into twilight, and in that quiet moment, in the stillness of Ravensbrook Manor, the space between them seemed to shrink. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat, her emotions tangled in a way she hadn't anticipated. William, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What do we do now? He stood before her, his hand still resting lightly on her chin, his gaze filled with something she couldn't quite place. We keep going, he said quietly. We keep moving forward, together, one step at a time. And in that moment, with the weight of everything unspoken between them, Evelyn realized that this, whatever it was something real. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just a connection formed out of necessity. It was something deeper, something that had taken root in both of them, in the quiet spaces of their hearts. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they were both ready for something new, something they hadn't expected but were both willing to embrace. Inevitably, life at Ravensbrook Manor continued its slow, steady rhythm, but the quiet transformation within its walls did not go unnoticed. As spring slowly unfurled its warmth across the land, the atmosphere in the manor grew lighter, more vibrant, as though it too was awakening from the long slumber of grief. William and Evelyn's unspoken bond had deepened over the weeks that followed their quiet confession to one another. Samuel was flourishing under the care of both his father and Evelyn. His laughter was no longer a rare sound, but a constant presence in the halls of the manor. The boy, once so withdrawn and distant, now ran through the corridors, his eyes bright with the promise of a life that was beginning to feel full once more. Despite the new ease in their home, William and Evelyn's relationship was still a delicate thing. They had both taken the unspoken step of acknowledging their growing feelings, but neither knew how to proceed. Evelyn, still feeling the weight of her place in the household, remained cautious. She had never intended for things to develop as they had, but there was no denying the feelings that had taken root in her heart. She had not expected to care so deeply for the man who had hired her to care for his son, and yet, with every passing day, she found herself drawn closer to him. William, on the other hand, was caught in his own turmoil. He had spent years building walls around his heart, refusing to allow anyone close enough to hurt him again. But Evelyn had done the unthinkable. She had slipped through those walls and into his life, and now he couldn't imagine his world without her. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the estate, William found himself standing in the garden, watching Samuel chase after the birds. The garden, once a place of sorrow and abandonment, now seemed alive with color and life, a reflection of the change that had come to the manor. He sighed deeply, his gaze shifting to Evelyn, who was tending to the flowers near the edge of the garden. There was something so natural about her presence here, as if she had always belonged. The soft rustle of her movements, the way she hummed under her breath as she worked, it was as though the garden itself had become a part of her. His heart swelled with an emotion he had never expected to feel. He took a step closer, his footsteps soft. On the grass. She didn't notice him at first, so lost in her task, but as he approached, she looked up, meeting his gaze. The smile she gave him was soft but full of warmth, and in that moment, William knew that whatever else happened, he had found something he never thought he would: peace. Evelyn, he said, his voice low and steady. We've both changed, haven't we? She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I think we have, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. But I didn't expect it to happen this way. I didn't expect to care so much. William's heart tightened at her words. Neither did I, he admitted. But here we are. For a moment, they simply stood in the quiet of the garden, the air thick with unspoken words and the weight of everything that had passed between them. William reached out then, his hand brushing against hers in a gentle touch. I don't want to lose this, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I don't want to lose what we've found. Evelyn felt her breath catch in her throat. Her heart was pounding in her chest, the realization of what he was saying settling over her like a wave. She looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the same vulnerability she had seen in herself. I don't want to lose it either, she whispered, her voice trembling. For the first time, they both understood what the future could hold. Uncertain, yes, but filled with possibilities they hadn't allowed themselves to consider before. William stepped closer, his hand finding hers, and together, they stood in the garden, the weight of their shared silence speaking louder than any words could. And in that moment, with the sun setting behind them, they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The garden, now full of life, was a reflection of the new chapter they had begun, one they could only walk together, side by side. Inevitably, time passed, and the quiet happiness that had settled over Ravensbrook Manor only grew stronger with each day. William and Evelyn found themselves together more often than they ever had before, the distance between them closing with every shared moment, every glance. The bond between them was no longer a fragile thing, but a solid connection they both embraced. Samuel, too, had blossomed. The boy who had once seemed so distant and lost in his grief was now full of life. His laughter echoed through the halls, and his eyes sparkled with the joy of a child who had rediscovered the warmth of family. It wasn't just Evelyn who had brought him back. It was the slow return of their own bond as a family, of a father and son finding their way back to each other through the quiet love and care they both shared. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, the weight of the day's work finally lifting from their shoulders, William turned to Evelyn, his heart full of something he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low but filled with warmth, "I've been thinking about everything, about us." Evelyn looked up from her book, her eyes meeting his. There was a softness in her gaze, an understanding that had developed between them over time. "What about us?" she asked gently, though she already knew. William took a breath, his fingers brushing the rim of his glass as he searched for the right words. "I never thought I would feel this way again," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I first hired you, I never imagined that you would become so much more than just someone who helped with the house. You've brought back something I thought I lost forever. You've brought back life into this place, and into me." Evelyn's heart fluttered at his words. She had never expected her time at Ravensbrook to lead to this, to a connection so deep and meaningful, but here she was, standing at the edge of something she could not deny. "William," she whispered, her voice soft, "I didn't come here to change things. I came here to help. But somewhere along the way, she trailed off, unsure of how to put her feelings into words." William reached out, his hand gently taking hers, the simple touch sending warmth through her. "I know," he said quietly. "I feel it too." He paused for a moment, as if weighing the truth of his own feelings. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want you in it. You and Samuel. I want us to be a family." Evelyn's heart leaped in her chest, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. She had never imagined that the man who had hired her, the grieving widower who had so carefully built his walls, would ever ask for something like this. But here he was, offering her something she had never dared to hope for. "You don't have to ask," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've already chosen." The room seemed to fade around them, the fire crackling softly in the background, as their hands remained clasped, their hearts beating in sync. For the first time in a long time, both of them felt something they had been missing: hope. Hope for a future they could share together, a future filled with love, with family, and with the promise of new beginnings. As the days grew warmer, so did the bond between William, Evelyn, and Samuel. They were no longer just a broken family trying to heal. They were whole, each piece fitting perfectly into place. William found himself watching Evelyn more often, his admiration for her growing each day. She was not just a caretaker, not just someone who had stepped into their lives and brought them back to life. She was the woman he loved, the woman he wanted by his side for the rest of his days. And Evelyn, for all her quiet strength and cautious heart, knew without a doubt that she had found her place in this house, in this family. She had never thought it possible, but she had found the life she had always longed for. Together, they were ready for whatever the future held, ready to face it as one. And for the first time, Ravensbrook Manor felt like home, truly and completely. A home built on love, on care, and on the shared promise of tomorrow.